Welcome, everyone, to another chapter of Murder in Stratton County. A murder mystery with twists and turns. Written by Elizabeth Spoon and Ryland Mason. Narrated by me, Brian Shepard.
Chapter 11. Strangers. As Alice walked around to the counter, the bells had chimed on the door. Shep was out back shoveling out the dumpster. Hello? It was Gemma, the realtor. Behind her was Loomis and Diane. Oh, hello, she said as she looked at all three of them. Can I help you? She asked. Gemma smiled. Loomis stepped away from Gemma and Diane and put out his hand to Alice. Alice took it, shaking it. She had an odd feeling come over her, like they were all watching. It was interesting. Alice then pulled her hand away. We are closing here shortly, she said. Diane then stepped ahead of him and said, Hi, I'm Diane. Alice reached for her hand. She grasped it in hers, looking the woman in the eyes. Her eyes were green. Alice looked at Gemma while still holding Diane's hand. Well, Gemma said we are extending our stay for another day or two. We just need to grab a few things. Alice then just waved them on to get what they needed before she closed up. With Bucky gone, she was closing a little earlier than normal. It hadn't been very busy due to the storm anyway. After about 15 minutes had passed, Alice was still waiting for them to finish gathering what they wanted from the aisles. She could hear the back door of the kitchen open and close. Shep came out of the kitchen, his nose and cheeks red from shoveling in the cold. All done, he said, as Alice looked up from the magazine she was flipping through. That's good. Thank you. Shep turned for a minute. Is there someone in here? He said, lowering his voice. Yeah, that realtor and that other couple. She pointed towards the back of the market where they were all standing looking at candles Alice had for sale. Shep just smiled. Really? She shook her head. You're too much, Shep, as he headed down the aisle to try and chat it up with the realtor. Alice turned and then walked into her office. Grabbing her coat and hat, she flicked off the light and closed the door. She placed them on the stool behind the counter. She could hear Shep's booming voice as she walked into the kitchen to turn off the lights and latch the back door for the night. As she stood in the kitchen straightening up for the morning, she could see Shep moving towards the front counter. He started ringing the realtor's items out. Alice decided to stand back in the kitchen, watching all three of them for just a few minutes. Loomis and Diane are unusually quiet, while Shep just talks to Gemma. That's going to be $75.46, he says, hitting the total button on the register screen. Gemma pulled out a credit card from her wallet and handed it to him. Shep handed the card back to Gemma, who now looked confused. You have to swipe it yourself using the pin pad, he said as he pointed to the card reader attached to the counter stand. Gemma did as Shep said and swiped her card, now looking even more confused. I don't want debit, I want credit. Red or green button for credit, she asked. Red for credit, he said. The transaction was complete, and Shep was waiting for a receipt. Loomis grabbed the two bags off the counter, handing one of them to Diane. We'll see you over there, he said to Gemma. She smiled at him briefly as he and Diane left and crossed the street, disappearing into the bed and breakfast. The credit card machine spit out a receipt, and Shep handed a pen to her to sign it. Thanks. No problem. Placing the receipt in the register. Have a good night, he said as she made her way out the door and crossed the street. Then Alice came out of the kitchen. Hey, Shep, she said. Yeah? Do you get a weird feeling from any of them? She asked with a concerned look on her face. Shep just smiled. No way. She's great. She just sighed. No, not her. The other two. Shep thought for a minute. No, not really. They're just not from around here, Alice. Suppose you're right. I'm heading home. Can you finish locking up? Yeah, kid. Get out of here, he said, shooing her towards the door. Alice pulled on her coat and hat, dropping the deposit bag into the safe for the night. I'll take care of this in the morning, she said. Good night. See you in the AM, kiddo. As she zipped up her coat and went out the door, heading down the frozen sidewalk, she quickened her pace a little. It was cold. Before long, she was walking up the steps to her front door. Pulling the key from her pocket, she unlocked the door and walked into her hallway. Henry let out a huge, loud meow. Hello, Henry. He came running down the hallway, excited she was home. Alice flicked on the light and looked at the thermostat in the hallway. Turning it up, she went into the kitchen to feed him. Tough day, old friend. She then brushed her hand over his back as he crouched on some dry kibble. Alice headed up the stairs to get out of her work clothes and relax. She laid up on her pillow, thinking about the day. So much was going on in this little town. She took a deep breath and clicked off the light. What would tomorrow bring? Over at the paper, Diego was still hard at work typing and revising the pages for the next edition of the paper. There was a lot going on. He had just received an email from Alice posting a new job available at the marketplace. And Miss Brentley had stopped by and dropped off a note to his mother about posting new hours for the bed and breakfast, since usually by this time it was very quiet and hardly any business around town. With little effort, he completed the sections for the sports and comics and was now about ready to print. His mind wandered a bit, thinking about the body and who it could have been in that bag. Diego just yawned and started printing the edition. It would be a bulky Sunday edition with all the coupons and extra flyers. Diego then started bundling them together, stuffing his satchel full for the trip out in the morning cold to deliver them. I better go clean off my bike, he thought, just in case he was able to ride it instead of walking in the cold. The printer continued its run while he pulled on his coat and hat and went to pull his bike out of the snow. Over at the station, Deputy Marks was sitting at his desk, staring blankly at the door to the lobby. It was quiet in the station. Dugan walked out of his office just then. Marks? Yeah, boss? I'm going to have to head out of town tomorrow to visit Malloy's family. His wife said the wake is Monday morning, followed by the funeral. His wife phoned me earlier today to make sure we're going to make it. So, does that mean I'm in charge? He asked. Yes, it does. How long do you think you'll be gone, sir? I think till Monday afternoon, maybe later. I will phone you when I have a better idea of the time. Tomorrow is Sunday, so it should be pretty quiet around here. While I'm gone, review all the files for the Shepard case and follow up on anything you can, if need be. Marks just gulped a little. It's quite a file, sir. I know. There's a lot of evidence and a lot of things that need to be tied together. I'm going to call the mayor when I get home, and hopefully we can all come together Tuesday or Wednesday and see where things are at. Stay vigil, and I will talk to you later. Dugan pulled up the zipper to his coat and pulled up his pants and headed out of the station towards home, where his wife was waiting. Marks sat back in his chair. I'm in charge, he said to himself. Jeez, never thought that would ever happen. Marks looked up at the clock on the wall above the fax machine. It was nearing 6 o'clock already. Marks decided to grab a sandwich from the vending machine and make a tour around town in his cruiser. He shoved in some change and was waiting for the machine to drop the sandwich to the flip-top door when he heard the buzzer at the front door go off. Who could that be? He fished the sandwich out of the machine and peeked around the corner to see who was in the lobby. He could see a tuft of blonde hair sticking out from a knit cap and scarf. They had their backs turned, still waiting for him to answer the buzzer. Deputy Marks stepped to the door and clicking the call button and said, "Hello? Can I help you?" To his surprise, it was Julianne Henshaw. He gasped for a second, his mouth agape. She just smiled at him. "Hello, Deputy." He stood staring at her for a minute, not knowing what to say. "Are you going to let me in?" she asked, still smiling. Yeah." He hit the button, and the door buzzed and clicked open. She was carrying a brown paper bag. "What's that?" Marks asked, looking at the bag. "It's dinner," she said. "Is there anyone here?" she said, looking around. No, just me. I was just about to head out on patrol," straightening his back. She set the bag down on his desk. "Does this mean you aren't hungry?" she asked, giving him a teasing smile. Marks sort of looked at the pre-wrapped sandwich still in his hand from the vending machine. "I'm starving, in fact," he said as he tossed the sandwich into the trash. Julianne took off her coat and slung it over the back of the chair. "I'm really not supposed to let people into the lounge," he said. "It's against the rules." "Please, have dinner with me. Even you gotta eat." "I guess I can patrol after that," he said, still baffled. He never thought she would ever take an interest in him. "Is there a table we can sit down at?" she said, picking up the bag from the desk. "Yes, right through here." He showed her into the employee lounge. As she walked past him, he could smell her perfume. She was wearing a knee-high black skirt and tight-fitting shirt that, of course, showed everything off. "This seems highly unusual to me," he said as she opened the bag and started pulling out the contents. He pinned the door open to the lounge so he could hear the phone if it did ring. "I know it is. Don't think I haven't noticed you flirting with me all that time at the bus stop," she said, waving a finger in front of him. Marks could feel himself blushing for a moment. Forgot all about everything that had been going on the last couple of days. "What prompted you to do so?" he said, sitting down across from her at the table. "Well, I figured it was about time I move on from my husband's death. I took a trip into the city after the storm and got a whole heap of Italian cuisine and figured I'd come share it with you. Show you my appreciation for making the effort with all the kids and such." He just smiled. "Darn ankle biters," he laughed. "Oh, they aren't bad all the time," she said. Pulling open the containers of food, she began serving portions of stuffed pasta shells and sauce onto a couple of plates. "This smells fantastic," he said, as the smell hit him right in the nose. Julianne then sat down, handing Marks a fork. "Dig in," she said. "I'm embarrassed to say this, but I don't know your first name," she said. "It's Jacob," shoving a huge bite of food into his mouth. "Jacob? I would have never have guessed." They chatted and conversed for a while over bites of dinner, Julianne doing most of the talking. So why now, after all this time? I didn't think you had any interest in me, he finally asked. Oh, I do, she said. It's just been very difficult for me to cope without my late husband. I finally realized the only closure I would get was that I gave myself, since they never recovered the ship or any bodies. As soon as she finished the sentence, Mark looked up at the clock. It was 7:30. He tensed up, realizing he was committing a not-so-good part of his duty. Oh, crap. I better get moving and make my patrol. They both stood up. Well, thanks for eating with me and having a conversation, she said as she started to pick everything up. Here, let me help you clean up, he said as he grabbed empty containers and plates and tossed them into the trash. Julianne had already gone to retrieve her coat from the chair near his desk. He shut the door to the lounge and grabbed his coat off the back of his desk chair. Let me walk you out, he said. They exited into the blustery cold night air and walked down the steps to where she had parked behind his cruiser. Thanks again for dinner, he said, turning towards her. My pleasure. Maybe we can do it again sometime? In a more formal setting, that is, she said, cracking a smile. Get home and stay warm, he said, as she got into the car and closed the door. As soon as he heard her car come to life, he made his way to his cruiser, unlocking the door and getting in. He started his cruiser and pulled away and drove off towards the high hills west of town. He sat in his cruiser for a minute, thinking about what had just happened. How she had just shown up out of the blue. Very random. Maybe he had finally made an impression after all. Marks pulled out to make his rounds around the otherwise quiet streets and dreamily thinking of his next encounter with the lovely Miss Henshaw. As Marks continued his rounds, looking carefully and cautiously at everything as the night drew on, he proceeded past the Victor place, which was now fully lit, its new occupants, the Benson family, enjoying their new space. Up the road from there was the sheriff's house. He drove by. The only light on there was the outside porch light. No doubt he and his wife had headed out of town for Malloy's wake and funeral in the city. Marks made his way in a circle all the way back to town, pulling over on the side street for a moment to log his commute time. As he typed on the keyboard, he heard a loud engine coming up the road. It was Shep, just leaving the market for the night. He pulled over, rolling down the window. Evening, deputy. Good evening, Shep. All done for the night? Yeah, I'm heading on home. Well, drive safe. I will. Ain't got far to go, Shep said as he pulled away, leading up the road, just to make a right at the next corner. His tail lights disappeared out of view in the rearview mirror. Marks looked down again at the keyboard, still typing his log. Okay, that's it. He clicked off the overhead light and put the cruiser back in drive. Pulling away from the curb, he headed back to Main Street, where other than a bundled-up couple walking down the sidewalk, it was quiet. They disappeared into the bed and breakfast as Mark drove by the station. Marks pulled to the front of the station, putting his cruiser in park. He sat there idling, staring off into the darkness. It was going to be a long night, he thought. Hopefully, a quiet one. With the heavy snow and cold, most people would be home and not out. He kicked the back seat a little and leaned his head against the headrest. Thinking of Julianne, he started to catch himself dozing off. He rolled down the window and took a fresh breath air. I'd better get some coffee. He left the cruiser running and ran inside to the station to use the bathroom and, of course, to get a coffee. The night pressed on, and Marks made his rounds again through the silent town. It was starting to creep into the early hours of Sunday morning. He was starting to get hungry. He parked his cruiser in front of the marketplace, waiting for Shep or Alice to come open so he could get some breakfast. Marks began to doze off when he heard a sound. It was Diego dropping the bundle of Sunday papers in front of the store, and then pedaling away on his bike where he could avoid snowbanks and unshoveled parts of the sidewalk. Marks watched him in his rear view as he pedaled to the end of the street, across, and headed up the street. Before long, the day started to break, and Shep came roaring into his parking spot behind the market. He greeted the deputy and opened the door, letting him inside. "No Alice today?" Marks asked, looking around. "No, she's taking the day off, and boy, does she need it." Marks sat down at the table and started reading the paper, waiting for Shep to start the kitchen equipment and get ready to serve breakfast. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next time for Chapter 12.